Now, like you mentioned, the Falcons have a showdown with the Cardinals at the Benz this Sunday. And of course, the final game of the season next Sunday with the Buccaneers against them. Now, the reason I mentioned that is because Dean P said something interesting earlier this morning when he joined our guys, Hugh Douglas and John Fricky, on the morning show over at 92.9 The Game. He talked about the fact that players still have something to play for because you need to play for yourself, your family, your teammates, and really you need to play to show us exactly what you're made of. Like, what does this mean for you to really still show up and show out these last couple of games? We also postulate that you should show up because your job might be on the line. So, yes, it's not just about the name on the back of the jersey, but for some players, potentially the name on the front of the jersey. So, that being said, when we look at the defense and kind of who's going to be evaluated in these next couple of games, maybe tell me one player who you feel needs to show up and show out, but you also feel, hey, that person looks like he's a keeper.
You know what? To be honest with you, it has to be Lorenzo Carter. Like I've been banging that drum all year, right? And there are times that he showed up, and there are times where he's kind of disappeared. And I think that it would be good for him to show up because that's the type of guy that I would like to bring back. If he's going to show some consistency, right? Because we know that he has the size and the look. He's one of the first guys that should walk off a bus, right? And people look at him like, whoa, okay, this is what we're in for today. All right, cool. So I think that's what you want to see, and also that's what you want to, from a production standpoint, you want to see him continue to progress and show some consistency, even though he's not been able to do that throughout his entire career. But at this point, where the Falcons currently sit, guys who are capable of getting sacks, who've shown you that they're capable of getting sacks, they don't need to let those guys walk out the door. And I think he'll be a viable option from a financial standpoint. I think he's going to maybe only made a little bit over $1 million a year. There's some value there. Like, not only is people want to go out and get the big names and all that stuff. I get that. I understand that. Guys who get double-digit sacks. But guess what? That's going to be very expensive, man. And Falcons still have people they need to take care of in-house. Namely Chris Lindstrom. I know we talk about defense, but that's where the money, a good portion of that money, they got to get that sold up and figured out ASAP. So I think the guy that I feel like that needs to go out and have a good game and prove that he can show some consistency at the outside linebacker / edge position is Lorenzo Carter for sure.
Yeah, and I would probably give a nod to Rashaan Evans for many of the same reasons. You have him on a one-year prove-it deal, $1.75 million. Not too much to hit the cap if you decide to bring him back. And he has definitely shown maybe even a little more consistency than we've seen out of Lowe this season. So I would not mind if the Falcons brought him back as well. Now, speaking of players who are or teams really, I would say, that have something to prove, might be the Cowboys tonight. Don't know if the Titans will be able to prove anything as we get the NFL season. Week 17 started tonight. You want to hear about the reaction from that game, then you want to check out Locked On Sports today because they are the team. They are the team from our Locked On network that actually talks about the biggest stories in sports. They give you instant reaction to things. And just like we have for the culture, they have take of the day. So check out Locked On Sports today on the Odyssey app, on YouTube, or wherever you download your podcast, because they definitely bring you the national stories that you want to hear about. Now, we agree that Lowe, Rashaan are probably guys that Dean Pease and company want to bring back on defense, but let's just face it. There are some guys that if they don't do it in these next two games, at least as it stands today, your ticket to Flowery Branch will not be punched for next season. So give me one of those guys who you feel like, thank you for your service, but I think we're going to have to just go in a different direction next year.
I think it's going to have to be a guy like, Abdullah Anderson, because that's the guy I was thinking. Abdullah Anderson is a guy that, you picked up off the street. You brought him in from a body standpoint, and he ended up being the guy that was at least halfway decent, right? He was the reason why the Falcons cut Anthony Rush, but that's not saying much. So I think you need to bring in some guy from a draft standpoint or a free agency standpoint, to be that defensive end / defensive tackle guy that can get pressure up the middle and also be able to two-gap a little bit for you in that run game and be able to move that line of scrimmage back some, because that's where the problem that the Falcons have had, right? Outside of Grady Jarrett, they don't have anybody else. So I think they need to have somebody that can give you just a little bit more production, and he can go on about his way and appreciate your service. And he's one of those guys. And I think that I even looked up I even did a little research a little bit. I even found a guy that could fit into that role, a guy by the name of Sheldon Rankins. Now, he was originally drafted by the Saints, but he ended up getting picked up by the Jets, and he will be a free agent this year. So I think you'll be able to get him for a good number, had some decent numbers, had like 3 sacks, like 4 tackles for loss and everything like that. Look, solid production. That's what you're looking for. Rotational guys that can give you some good snaps to maybe potentially make some plays outside of 97. So that's kind of where I sit with from that up front. And Abdullah Anderson, we'll holler at you.
Yeah, I would agree as well. He was the one guy I looked at and I said, yeah, I just don't think you've shown enough. And if you're going to have a veteran to bring an additional presence on that D-line, like you said with Sheldon Rankins, who I'm familiar with, and we're both familiar with from his time in the NFC South with the Saints, that would be a solid go. And if you happen to be able to luck out and get yourself some D linemen in the draft, which is where I think you're probably going to get hopefully a couple, and see how they work out, because let's just face it, you might need a couple at the rate they're going with injuries, and you don't know what Taquan Graham is going to look like when he comes back next season. If you then go out and get those guys in the draft, and maybe it takes them a little bit longer to get up to speed of where Dean Pease might want them to be, then at least you can lean on someone like Sheldon Rankins, and he can actually bring you some productivity, because you've seen it when the Falcons have played against the Saints. So that could be a viable opportunity as well. And to your point, there won't be all of this cap space that people are thinking about to go out and necessarily get a free agent that's a big name. But if you can get someone solid and then maybe continue to build in the draft, that could be something for you. Now, hey, these last 2 games, Jarvis and I actually are feeling pretty positive about what the Falcons can do against the Cardinals and the Buccaneers. We also kind of were concerned 1 minute, positive the next, about what the Hawks were going to do with the Nets. But if you were a little stressed out last night, or you're a little stressed out ahead of tomorrow night's game against the Lakers, then you probably should have, or you should go to built.com and get yourself some Built Bars, because, hey, those little chunky chocolate puffs, they're pretty darn good with 100% real chocolate. Keeps the stress level down, right? Yes. Also keeps the fat content down, because it's only 160 grams of fat, but yet 60 calories of fat. I love to say grams, but 15 calories of protein, which is important because that makes it that much more soluble. Very easy to do. Build.com. Go to Locked On 15 as your code. That gets you 15% off your first order. And that way, if it's stress about the Hawks, if it's stress about Falcons, and miraculously, if it's stress about UGA in the Peach Bowl against Ohio State this weekend, at least you have a snack to give you some comfort.